People always say suburban life is boring. Just an endless cycle of mowing lawns and waving at neighbors you barely know. But let me tell you, in a place like Oak Creek, silence ISN and oppos. Tea always peace. Sometimes it's just the calm before a storm you never saw coming. It started with this guy. Let's call him Arthur Vance, a man who moved in 3 years ago and immediately acted like he'd been appointed by God himself to keep the grass exactly 2 inches tall. And honestly, we all just kind of rolled our eyes at first because every neighborhood has that one guy, right? But Arthur was different. He didn't just complain at the HOA meetings. He started wearing this tactical vest he probably bought on some clearance website with, in quote, HOA enforcement, in quote, plastered across the back in reflective letters, and he'd spend his Saturdays prowling the sidewalks with a heavy-duty flashlight and a clipboard, looking for a reason, any reason, to make someone's life miserable. We used to joke about it over backyard barbecues, calling him, in quote, General Vance, in quote, but the humor started to curdle when he began filming kids for, in quote, safety violations, in quote, and leaving fake orange citations on windshields that looked just legal enough to scare the older folks on the block. He was a small man looking for a big shadow to stand in, and he found it by terrorizing a community that was too polite to tell him to get lost, until the morning everything changed, the morning he decided to cross a line that you just dawn into oppos to come back from. It was one of those humid July Saturdays where the air feels like a wet blanket, and I was out there trying to fix a leak in my sprinkler system, just minding my own business when I saw little Chloe Miller out on her bike. Now, Chloe is the kind of kid who's just pure sunshine, 8 years old, missing her front teeth, wearing a helmet that's slightly too big for her head, just looping around the cul-de-sac and humming to herself. And she wasn't oppos, doing a single thing wrong. But there was Arthur standing at the edge of his driveway, watching her like a hawk watching a field mouse. I remember thinking, in quote, Arthur, just go inside, man, have a coffee and leave the kid alone, in quote. But I could see his face getting that blotchy red color it gets when he thinks someone is, in quote, disrespecting the sanctity of the paved surfaces, in quote. He started marching toward her, not walking, but marching with that clipboard tucked under his arm like he was delivering a declaration of war. And his voice carried across the yards, sharp and ugly, yelling at Chloe that she was, in quote, operating a vehicle on a restricted pedestrian walkway, in quote, and that her parents were going to be fined in a bankruptcy. The poor kid froze, her little sneakers scraping against the asphalt as she tried to stop, and you could see the confusion turn into genuine fear because, to an 8-year-old, a grown man in a black vest screaming at you is a monster, plain and simple. I dropped my wrench and started heading over there, but before I could even get halfway, things went from 0 to 100 in a way that still makes my stomach do flips when I think about it. Arthur didn't in oppos. Just want to yell that day. He wanted to dominate. He wanted to feel the weight of his, in quote, authority, in quote. And when Chloe tried to pedal away from him, crying for her mom, Arthur lost whatever grip on reality he had left. He reached into the bed of his truck, which was parked right there, and he didn't in oppos. Pull out a citation or a camera. He pulled out a short, heavy wooden bat, the kind people keep for home defense, and before anyone could even scream a warning, he swung. It wasn't oppos. A tap. It wasn't oppos. A scare tactic. It was a full-blooded swing aimed right at the side of that oversized helmet, and the sound it made, that hollow, sickening thwack, is something that's going to haunt my dreams until the day I die. Chloe didn't and oppos to even make a sound. She just crumpled, her bike spinning out from under her, and she hit the pavement like a rag doll while Arthur stood over her, breathing hard, his face twisted into this mask of self-righteous fury, actually shouting at a motionless child that, in quote, the rules are there for a reason, in quote, and that, in quote, ignorance is no excuse for lawlessness, in quote. I was running now, my heart hammering against my ribs, shouting for someone to call 911, and neighbors were spilling out of their houses, but Arthur just stood his ground, gripping that bat, looking at us like we were the ones who were out of line. He started pointing at people with his clipboard, telling us to stay back, claiming he was, in quote, securing a crime scene, in quote, and that Chloe had, in quote, resisted his lawful commands, in quote. And it was so delusional, so incredibly twisted that for a second, the whole street just went silent in pure shock. But that silence didn't end oppos. T last long because about 30 seconds later, a silver SUV came screaming around the corner, tires screeching so loud they sounded like a person screaming, and it fishtailed into the curb just inches from Arthur's truck. That was Chloe's dad, Elias Thorne. Now, most of us knew Elias as the quiet guy who worked late shifts and always had a kind word when he was out walking the dog, but we didn't in Oppos. To really know what he did, we just knew he was in government, end quote. Well, as Elias bailed out of that car before it was even in park, we found out real quick because the man who hit the ground wasn't in Oppos, the friendly neighbor anymore. He was a high-level field agent with the Marshal Service, and he looked like he was carved out of granite and, pure, un adulterante drage. Elias didn't end Oppos. Say a word at first. He just went straight to his daughter, dropping to the pavement, and the way his hand shook as he checked her pulse, whispering her name over and over, it was enough to break your heart into a million pieces. The paramedics were already turning into the street, sirens wailing. And as they took over, Elias stood up slowly, and the air around him just seemed to turn cold, like he was sucking all the heat out of the summer morning. He turned his eyes toward Arthur, who was still holding the bat, still trying to play the part of the HOA cop. And Arthur, bless his stupid, arrogant heart, actually had the nerve to try and, cite, Elias, telling him he needed to keep his, unruly ward, under control or face further action. I saw Elias's jaw tighten, a vein throbbing in his temple, and he walked toward Arthur with a gait that said he wasn't in Oppos. Just coming for a talk. He was coming for a reckoning. Arthur started backing up, finally realizing that his fake vest and his plastic badge didn't in Oppos. Mean a damn thing in the face of a father who had just watched his child get bludgeoned, and he started stammering about, community bylaws, authorized force, but Elias just reached out, grabbed the bat with one hand like it was a toy, and twisted it out of Arthur's grip so fast, I think he might have dislocated the guy's shoulder. You think this makes you a lawman? Elias's voice was so low, it was almost a growl, vibrating in his chest, and he took his own badge, the real one, gold and heavy and carrying the weight of the federal government. And he didn't in Oppos. To show it, he pressed it right into the center of Arthur's forehead. I spend my life hunting people like you, little men who hide behind shadows to hurt the innocent. And today, Arthur, you just ran out of shadows. The look on Arthur's face was priceless. The color just drained out of him until he looked like a sheet of paper, his eyes darting to the crowd of neighbors who were all filming, all witnessing his pathetic collapse from, general, to, criminal, The local police arrived in a swarm of blue and red lights, and Elias didn't end. Oppos, to even have to say much, the evidence was lying there on the ground in the form of a pink bike and a dented helmet, and the testimonies came pouring in like a broken dam. We told them everything. The months of stalking, the fake fines, the threats. And as the handcuffs clicked shut around Arthur's wrists, he started crying, actually sobbing, saying it was, all a misunderstanding, and that he, just wanted a nice neighborhood, Elias didn't end Oppos. To even watch them put Arthur in the car. He was already back at the ambulance, holding Chloe's hand as they loaded her in, and the look he gave the retreating police cruiser was one of cold, calculated promise. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The HOA was sued into the ground for allowing a man like that to represent them, even informally. And Arthur? Well, turns out when you assault a federal agent's daughter with a deadly weapon while pretending to be a cop, the justice system doesn't end Oppos. Just tap you on the wrist, it drops the entire building on you. He's looking at 20 years, no parole, and the last I heard, he's crying in his cell because the other inmates don and Oppos. Really respect his, enforcement, background. Chloe is okay now. She's got a scar near her temple that she calls her, warrior mark, and the neighborhood is quieter, truly quieter, not because of some fake cop, but because we actually look out for each other now. But makes you wonder, doesn't it, Oppos? How many people like Arthur are living on your street right now, just waiting for the right moment to let their little bit of, power, go to their heads? Have you ever had a deal with an HOA that felt more like a dictatorship, or a neighbor who thought they owned the sidewalk you walk on? I want to know, because sometimes the only way to stop a monster is to realize they and Oppos, standing right next to you. Drop a comment below. Tell me your stories of, neighborhood justice, and let's talk about where the line should be drawn before someone else ends up like Arthur, or worse, like Chloe.